I have a confession to make. We, as teachers, often talk about civilization and culture without pausing and taking time to discuss with our students what civilization and culture actually are. The typical student will recall taking various courses falling under those labels. For example, Western civilization. But when forced to do so, students often conflate or confuse the two terms. It's important that we draw a clear distinction between civilization and culture in order to better appreciate our discussions of either concept. Since students should understand the major characteristics of civilization and how civilization emerges from various regions, it's important to examine the attributes or the distinguishing characteristics of both in order to pursue those distinctions. Now, a common definition of civilization is an advanced state of human society in which a high level of culture, science, industry, and government have been reached. Now, the use of such terms as advanced and high level are highly problematic to me for several reasons. First, because those terms represent overt value statements or judgments. That is, that civilization is better, more advanced, and superior to other forms of social organization, such as those represented by tribal societies. Now, this definition is also problematic because civilizations have given rise to so very many things that might well be considered negative. Think about war, racism, slavery, poverty, disease, sexism, and many other caustic human conditions. And you'll see that these conditions were most often propagated by so-called and mischaracterized advanced civilizations. So you can now better appreciate how this level of unclarity contributes to the conflation of the two terms. A less value-laden description might define civilization as no more than one of many types of human communities. While a civilization might be large, it's essentially based on the domestication of plants, animals, and people. On the other hand, culture is everything about a human community. Culture is its stuff, such as its knowledge, beliefs, and practices. And this stuff will always have a unique and distinguishing flavor. That is why we make references to labels such as African culture, as if it was one monolithic flavor. When in reality, depending on where you actually focus in Africa, the cultures may be highly different. The same reasoning applies to our use of the label African civilization. So you see, although we generally think of civilizations as being larger than cultures, because by definition, a civilization is a large community of humans. When we view both terms in this manner, we can easily see that a civilization is actually a particular kind of culture. So, a civilization is no more than a large community of humans, and its most basic attributes are a stable food supply, social structures, government, consciousness of the divine, sensitivity to the aesthetic, use of technology, structured modes of communication. Now, a stable food supply is self-explanatory. If we don't eat, we die. You gotta eat. Social structures, on the other hand, manifest themselves in various ways. For example, the family, in this case, the nuclear family, the father, the mother, the children, even grandparents. Those are social structures, and there are many and a variety of social structures in various civilizations. Government. What is the purpose of government? Many say the purpose of government is to do for those who cannot do for themselves. But theoretically, government is charged with the administration of the community's rules. Consciousness of the divine. Let's make a distinction here because much literature will say that it is religion. Religion is a formal structure. Consciousness of the divine is an innate part of being human. The consciousness that there is something greater than oneself. So the distinction between those two is clear here and critical here. An attribute of a civilization is a focus on the consciousness of the divine. Sensitivity to the aesthetic. Well, the aesthetic in itself can manifest itself through music, dance, visual arts, and architecture. And unless we have a sensitivity to those things, we don't pursue them in our daily lives. The use of technology is somewhat self-explanatory, but key here is that it's not necessarily the ability to create technology as much as it is to use technology. Much in the sense that a monkey will use a stick to dig ants out of an anthill to eat. Technology. And structured modes of communication. Those structured modes of communication can be varied. Writing, language, any type of system that we use to communicate with each other and between each other. Now, as I previously stated, culture is everything about a human community. It's stuff, such as its knowledge, beliefs, and practices. And this stuff will always have a unique and distinguishing flavor. The fact that a culture is smaller than a civilization doesn't negate its powerful influence. For example, the African civilization has various cultures within it, in the same way as Greek civilization has various Greek cultures within it. When we approach the terms in this manner, we can see how various cultures may come together and contribute to the establishment of a civilization. On the other hand, only culture can be learned. And in the same manner, it can also be transmitted from one generation to the next generation. Take, for example, the making of goulash. Now, I know you've never heard of this term, but in its original form, goulash is an originally African dish. And unless you've had the pleasure of consuming some goulash, you might never appreciate its implications to this current discussion on civilization and culture. You see, we often attribute goulash to the country of Hungary and the Hungarian people. But my great ancestors made and consumed goulash, which is a very interesting commentary on how cultural traditions often migrate across peoples, countries, and boundaries, and consequently are assumed and consumed by the cultures within those boundaries. My ancestors passed down this cultural recipe, and I'm very fond of making goulash in the same manner as they did. I see other examples of goulash in restaurants. They don't call it goulash, they call it gumbo. Through the media of speech, communication, and ancestral traditions, it's possible for culture to evolve and even be inherited or absorbed by other groups of people. As I inherited the cultural tradition of making a meal out of whatever scraps were available, goulash. It is cultural only to the extent that I can connect it to my unique ancestral memory. Culture can be transmitted and passed on, whereas it's quite impossible to pass on an entire civilization. Are you now thoroughly confused? Well, don't be, because the obvious distinctions between a civilization and a culture are actually quite simple to discern, as I hope to demonstrate. Take, for example, the lowly ant. Now, as you may very well know, ants have evolved over 100 million, if not even a billion years, from solitary creatures to now living in the most complex of all social structures. They call those social structures superorganisms. These ant societies have several features in common with human civilizations. Just as civilizations have social structures and governments, ants also have rigid hierarchical caste systems. And ants certainly have communication. For example, did you know that ants actually communicate through a complex system of 10 to 20 chemical signals? Those signals are transmitted chemically, normally, and ants have a very intricate communication system. But you might inquire, what about a sustainable food source? Well, actually, some ants actually herd aphids, just as humans herd cattle. Even more, the leafcutter ants of South America have agriculture. They chew the cuttings of the huge leaves, they fertilize them with their feces to produce a mushroom-like fungus. And guess what they do with that fungus? They eat it. And did you know that most ant societies have aggressive warriors? As a matter of fact, ant societies are even more aggressive and warlike than human societies, sometimes attacking their own species over food and territory. Ants have a significant effect on their environment. Moving around as much as they do, they shift dirt, just like earthworms, enriching the soil. And finally, here's the kicker. If all ants died, extinctions on the planet Earth would actually increase. If all humans died, extinctions on the planet Earth would decrease. Do ants know something about culture and civilization that we as human beings don't know? This is why our exploration of what it means to be human is so very critical.